Sent away. Deborah's mother looked down at her 5 sleeping children. She had not slept all night. In a few hours, the sun would come up. It would be a new day, the terrible day she would have to give her children away. Deborah's father had left home to sail the seas in search of adventure. Now he was dead, drowned in a shipwreck at sea. Deborah's mother was sick and poor. She could no longer take care of all her little ones. She touched the sleeping children one by one. Her hand stayed the longest on Deborah's soft brown hair. "You are most like your father," she thought. "It is you I will miss the most." Deborah Sampson was only 5 years old when she had to leave her mother and her home in Plimpton, Massachusetts. It was the year 1765, 10 years before the start of the Revolutionary War. She was sent to live with Miss Fuller, her mother's cousin. Cousin Fuller was sweet and jolly. She never had children of her own, but she knew just what would make a sad little girl happy again. She baked cookies for Deborah. She gave Deborah a bed of her own, a soft feather bed that she did not have to share with anyone. Deborah loved her kind cousin. Miss Fuller taught her how to spin and weave and how to make bread. But best of all were the wonderful hours of reading lessons. Deborah learned the alphabet by heart. She learned to read quickly. For 3 years, Deborah was happy. Then, one day, Miss Fuller became ill. 3 days later, she was dead. Deborah cried. Dear, sweet cousin Fuller. She had been like a mother to Deborah. Deborah was now 8 years old and without a home. Her own mother was still too sick to take care of her. She tried to find another place for Deborah to live. The only person who would take Deborah in was 80-year-old Mrs. Thatcher, who lived in Middleborough. Mrs. Thatcher must be the oldest lady in the world, Deborah thought. Mrs. Thatcher was too feeble to do anything for herself. Deborah had to do everything. She had to feed old Mrs. Thatcher like a baby. The old lady could hardly lift her spoon to her mouth. Deborah did all the hard work, too. She carried in heavy loads of wood for the fire. She kept the fire going and swept up the ashes. She washed the clothes and did all of the cooking. Every day was like every other, full of hard work and loneliness. It was too much for an 8-year-old girl, but there was nothing else Deborah could do. That's how it was for a poor girl without anyone to take care of her. If only I could see my mother, Deborah thought over and over. But her mother lived too far away, and besides, who would take Deborah there? Sometimes Deborah thought she did not have a friend in all the world. She was wrong. The minister of Middleborough thought about Deborah often. He came to see how she was getting on. He saw the feeble old lady nodding her head by the fire. He saw Deborah growing taller and thinner and paler. The good minister made a promise to himself. "I will get this child out of here," he said. He kept his promise. Mrs. Thatcher was sent to live with relatives, and Deborah was sent to live with Deacon Thomas and his family in the same town of Middleborough. A family again. A family! A laughing, loving, crying, hugging family. Deborah had almost forgotten what family was. But the Thomas family was not her family. She knew what she was in the Thomas household, a servant. And she knew she would have to be a servant for 10 years. That was the agreement. Deacon Thomas would give her a place to stay, food to eat, and clothes to wear. Deborah knew she would have to work hard for 10 years. 10 years. A long time. What will I be like in 10 years? She wondered. 10 years from now was too far away to think about. Better think about right now. At least she had her own little room above the kitchen in the loft upstairs. And there was plenty to do right now. Mrs. Thomas had 4 lively little boys for her to look after. She dressed the youngest, fed them, and told them stories. She helped with every job in the house and did the barn. She swept, cleaned, cooked, carried in the wood, and brought in the water. But the family was so lively and Deborah was kept so busy that she soon forgot the lonely, long days at Mrs. Thatcher's house. There was so much to do. Deborah hardly had a moment to herself. She had no time to do what she liked best, reading. In those days, people did not think it was important for girls to read. Some people thought too much reading gave girls brain fever. Deacon Thomas and his wife thought all a girl had to learn was how to work well. Deborah was a good worker. She grew strong as she milked the cows, fed the pigs, and tended the chickens. She learned how to harness the family horse, and she rode the horse to the village on errands. She helped plow the fields. When it looked like rain, she raked up all the hay and stored it neatly inside the barn. She learned how to make the things she needed: a basket, a sled, a milking stool. Deborah taught the three oldest boys how to read, so when summer came, they were ready to go to the summer school in the village. School started at 6:30 in the morning and lasted 2.5 hours. Then the boys came home to do their share of work. Late in the afternoon, they went back to school. Deborah would stand at the window and watch the boys run, laughing down the road. If only I could go with them, she thought. When the boys came home, she begged them to teach her what they had learned that day, but they didn't want to talk about school or learning. They only wanted to wrestle with her and tease her. The Thomas children thought Deborah was odd, even a little crazy. Why did she care so much about school? Why did she ask so many questions? How do flowers and vegetables grow, and why? What are the stars made of? How far away are they? What makes the sun set and the moon rise? Deborah often got up before the sun rose and climbed to the top of a nearby hill to watch the night sky lighten into day. Deborah begged Deacon Thomas to let her go to school sometimes, but there was always too much work to do. There was a new baby in the house now, and another on the way. She couldn't be spared. So Deborah borrowed the children's school books. At night, in her little room above the kitchen, she read until her candle flickered out. She practiced writing with a pen she made herself from goose feathers. She dipped the pen into homemade ink and wrote on a piece of bark from a birch tree. She started writing in a diary, a book in which she wrote down her good and her bad thoughts and deeds. On the right-hand pages, she wrote down all her good thoughts and the good things she had done. On the left-hand pages, she wrote down all the things she thought of as bad. The left-hand pages filled up first. Deacon Thomas had to say to her often, "I wish you wouldn't spend so much time scribbling." There was one lesson Deacon Thomas thought all his children should learn: how to use money wisely. Every child in the family was given some lambs to raise and sell. They were allowed to keep the money to buy something useful. Deacon Thomas let Deborah have some lambs too. She took good care of her flock and got a good price for them. It was the first time she ever had money of her own. She had earned it herself. It was a good feeling. Carefully, she wrapped the money in a handkerchief and put it away.